Good morning, Olive, Arlo, and Frank. Grandpa coming to you from the living room in Jacksonville Beach. And this morning we're going to take a look at the second most important thing that ever happened in the history of the world. Now, in the beginning of the book of Matthew, we talked about the third most important thing that ever happened since the beginning of the world. And that was the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. This week we're going to look at the death of that same Jesus. And then next time we're going to look at the resurrection, which is the most important thing that ever happened in the entire world. And it should be the most important thing that ever happened in your life. But that is up to you. Nobody can make that decision for you. So let's jump right in. Get some tea so my voice will hold up. When it was early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people plotted against Jesus to execute him. They tied him up, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. So this is Pontius Pilate. He's the ruler of this section of the Roman Empire of Judea, and he rules from Jerusalem. He had to deal with a lot of rabble-rousers who wanted wanted the Messiah to come and take over the rule of the Jewish people and throw the Romans out. So there was a lot of that. There was a lot of insurrection. And now he has this guy brought before him, and he has no idea who he is. But we're going to see throughout the Gospels that he starts to know who he is. Now when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus had been condemned, he regretted what he had done and returned the 30 silver coins to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. And if you remember, that's how they knew where Jesus was, is Judas, one of the 12 disciples, went over to the chief priests and said, hey, I'll let you know where he is. Give me some money. But they said, what is that to us? You take care of it yourself. So Judas threw the silver coins into the temple and left. Then he went out and hanged himself. The chief priests took the silver and said, it is not lawful to put this into the temple treasury, since it is blood money. After consulting together, they bought the potter's field with it as a burial place for foreigners. For this reason, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. And to this day is probably around 70 AD. 60 AD, somewhere around there, when this book was written. And this is interesting because 30 pieces of silver, I know as a kid when this was taught to me that it was almost like, oh, how could you sell Jesus for this? And I'm not saying that there was any amount of money that you should sell somebody for to be crucified. We're going to see he's going to die a horrible death. But it's not a small sum of money. They get to buy a whole cemetery with this. Now, I don't think that this is still called that. I've been to Israel, and I've been to Jerusalem, and I don't recall going to the Potter's Field or having people say, "Oh, this cemetery used to be the Potter's Field." But I'm sure wherever it is that they bury non-Jewish people there, it's it's still part of that. Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. They took the 30 silver coins, the price of the one whose price had been set by the people of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me. So this was prophesied by Jeremiah. Then Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And this is what he had been brought before him for. This man says he's the king of the Jews, and Caesar is the king of all the Romans. So you need to kill him. Jesus said, "You say so." So he's not saying, "Yeah, I am," or "No, I'm not." He's going, "No, you just called me that. You're the one who said the words King of the Jews." But when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he did not respond. Then Pilate said to him, "Don't you hear how many charges they are bringing against you?" But he did not answer even one accusation, so that the governor was quite amazed. So the governor's not going like, "Oh, this guy's this horrible insurrectionist." He's saying, "This man's amazing. He's been accused of all these things, and he's not defending himself." During the feast, the governor was accustomed to release one prisoner to the crowd, whomever they wanted. So this was just some custom that they had, where during the Passover, which the Romans understood all about the Jewish faith, and it's like, okay, it's Passover, so you can have one of these people, and it would be some sort of what the Romans considered an insurrectionist, and what the Jews considered a rebel warrior, a fighter for the cause. So yeah, we'll give you one of these people back. And even today, the President of the United States can commute the sentence of people. And they've all done that. I believe every president. I know the modern ones have all released people, commuted sentences. A lot of the times they do it at the very end when they're not going to be in office anymore, and they let people go. They have to be federal prisoners. The states, I think every state, the governor can do it too. I know governors in a lot of states can do it, and I would guess that it's every state. At that time, they had in custody a notorious prisoner named Jesus Barabbas. So his same kind of name, Jesus Barabbas, son of the Father, Barabbas. God is our salvation, son of the Father. So there, after they had assembled, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Jesus Barabbas, or Jesus, who is called the Christ, the Messiah?" for he knew that they had handed him over because of envy. As he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent a message to him. That's the Bema seat. That he would sit in this seat to pass judgment. It's kind of like his throne, but he's not a king. He's a governor. He's appointed by Caesar from Rome. Have nothing to do with that innocent man. I have suffered greatly as a result of a dream about him today. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governor asked them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Christ?" They said, "Crucify him." He asked, "Why? What wrong has he done?" But they shouted more insistently, "Crucify him." And that's the thing about crowds. Crowds get a mind of their own, and they don't follow logic. They don't follow justice. He said, "Well, what has he done?" And they don't say what he's done. They just scream louder. "Kill him. Kill him. What's he done? Kill him." So now Pilate has to decide, okay, well, my wife's telling me, let this guy go. And the crowd is telling me to kill him. What should I do? I'm sure that he respected everything his wife said to him, and that's what he wanted to do. But he's also a politician. He has to make a political decision. Now, if he goes against the crowd, there could be a riot. He could be toppled. A whole revolution could start, because that was always an option, and there were several revolutions that happened around this time in Israel. And eventually, in 70 AD, they burned the city down because of an insurrection, and changed it. Changed the name. It went from Judea to Palestina, which is why now people say, "Oh, it's called Palestine." Well, that was the name given to that area by the Romans, and it was named after the enemy, the Philistines, the enemy of the Jewish people. When Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but that instead a riot was starting, he took some water, washed his hands before the crowd, and said, I am innocent of this man's blood. You take care of it yourselves." In reply, all the people said, "Let his blood be on us and on our children." And it is. It is. Then he released Barabbas for them. But after he had Jesus flogged. Now, flogged is they take this cat o' nine tail that had chunks of bone. It was a whip that had many whips put together, and there were these little chunks of metal and bone that were woven in there, and so it cut your back, and they flogged them over and over again. Then he released Barabbas to them, but after he had Jesus flogged, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the governor's residence and gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe around him, and after braiding a crown of thorns, they put it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand, and kneeling down before him, they mocked him. So Pilate had respect for him, but now the soldiers, these are Roman soldiers. Now he was turned in, the crowd that came out to get him, the soldiers, they were temple soldiers, they were Jews. Remember that on the Mount of Olives when he was coming down and Judas went, yeah, I'm going to kiss the guy. Those people that came and got him, they weren't Romans, but these are Romans here, and they just think, oh yeah, this is funny. This guy says he's the king of the Jews, but we're the kings of the Jews as Romans, as soldiers. So they make, they take a robe and put it on him, and he's naked. They strip him down, take his clothing off that he had on. It was different than what we wear now and what they wear in Israel now. But they took that clothing off of him and put on this fake king suit. And kneeling down before him, they mocked him. Hail, King of the Jews. They spat on him and took the staff and struck him repeatedly on the head. When they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes back on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. So these are despicable people. Whatever they thought of this was a prisoner. But they want to rub it in like, hey, you're going to die, and this is the last thing you're going to remember. But little did they know what was going to happen afterwards. As they were going out, they found a man from Cyrene named Simon, whom they forced to carry his cross. And that was one of the things, is not only were we going to hang you on a cross, nail you, put nails through your hands and your ankles, and nail you to a cross, but we're going to make you carry that giant wooden cross. They came to a place, and there's a guy here in the neighborhood that has this big wooden cross, not big enough to crucify someone. And he goes out on the beach, and he said that Jesus did it, and that God told him that that's what he wanted him to do. And who knows? A lot of people think he's crazy. I think, well, hey, good for you, buddy. His name's John. Very nice man. Very interesting to talk to. Sometimes he goes to the intersection around the corner and just sits there with a sign telling people that they need Jesus to be saved. Anyway, they found this fellow named Simon, whom they forced to carry his cross. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, and offered Jesus wine mixed with gall to drink. But after tasting it, he would not drink it. When they had crucified him, they divided his clothes by throwing dice. Then they sat down and kept guard over him there. Above his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." And I always found it interesting since I started reading the Bible that they accused him of the truth. And we find, without getting political about this, that a lot of times people pay for telling the truth. Most of the times they don't pay anything like Jesus paid. Then two outlaws were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by defamed him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who can destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself." So they're saying, and this tells you a couple things. Number one, they knew about that, with Jesus saying that. That was like a scandal that he said, destroy this temple and I can raise it up in 3 days. He wasn't talking about the temple that they were down the road from right now. He was talking about the temple of his body. And he's getting ready to do that. This is day one of those 3 days when it's going to be raised. And we'll get to that next chapter. But these people are mocking him. And they're saying, if you're powerful enough to build the temple in 3 days, how come you're not powerful enough to jump down from that cross? In the same way, even the chief priests, together with the experts in the laws and elders, were mocking him. He saved others, but he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. If he comes down now from the cross, we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God, if he wants to, deliver him now. Because he said, I am God's son. The robbers who were crucified with him also spoke abusively to him. So here's, not only does he have the crowd and all the Jewish leaders making fun of him, but the two guys dying with him. These guys have nails through their hands and their ankles. And they're hanging there, and it's a horrible form of death because you can't hold yourself up, and so you wind up like not being able to breathe. Without getting into the whole thing, I read a book that went into detail about what Roman crucifixion was like. And it's just horrible. And these guys are going like, yeah, this is really excruciatingly painful, but we're going to take some time to mock this other guy for saying he's the king of the Jews. And what they didn't realize is God was saving somebody. He was saving you. He wasn't going to save Jesus. That was the whole plan. This was done on purpose. And none of these folks understood it. If you understand it, well, then this didn't happen for nothing. And it already didn't happen for nothing because so many people understand it and have put their faith in it. Now from noon until 3, darkness came over all the land. At about 3 o'clock, Jesus shouted with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I think that's from the Psalms. When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, this man is calling for Elijah. And Elijah was one of the big-time prophets. Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink. But the rest said, leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah will come and save him. Then Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and gave up his spirit. Just then the temple curtain was torn in two from top to bottom. And this curtain was, I think, about 36 feet high, and it was very, very thick. It was one piece, and it just went. The earth shook, and the rocks were split apart. And tombs were opened, and the bodies of many saints who had died were raised. They came out of the tombs after his resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. Now, when the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were extremely terrified and said, "Truly, this one was God's Son." Many women who had followed Jesus from Galilee and given him support were also there, watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. And so that's James and John. So it's two different James. There's a lot of the same names. And Mary is a big one. Miriam in Hebrew. Now when it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was also a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered that it be given to him. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and placed it in his own new tomb that he had cut in the rock. Then he rolled a great stone across the entrance of the tomb and went away. Now Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting there opposite the tomb. So these are witnesses. And in Old Testament biblical law, you needed two witnesses to prove a fact. The next day, which is after the day of preparation, so this is all happening pretty quickly. The night before, they prepared to eat the Passover, and then we had the Last Supper, and now it's the next morning. The chief priests and Pharisees were assembled before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember that while that deceiver was still alive, he said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.'" So this is very interesting. He said, "Tear down this temple and I'll rebuild it in 3 days." And the people knew that part of it. But these Jewish leaders know what he was really talking about. So they knew that part of it. They got more of the, hey, guess what this guy said? So give orders to secure the tomb until the third day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal his body and say to the people, "He has been raised from the dead." And the last deception will be worse than the first. So we have two witnesses there watching the tomb. And now we're going to have guards put in front of the tomb. Pilate said to them, "Take a guard of soldiers, go and make it as secure as you can." So they went with the soldiers of the guard and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone. So they must have used some sort of sealing wax, so they would know if somebody came and stole the body. And there's a book called The Passover Plot that was very popular back in I think the 1970s. I read it back when I was an agnostic, and I agreed with it. Oh yeah, Jesus. The one thing was that he really didn't die, that he just swooned, passed out. They put him in there, and then he got up and took off. And the other, but these guys, they know he's dead, and they're gone. Yeah, somebody's going to come and steal the body, bury it someplace else, and say, "This guy said he was going to rise from the dead, and he did. So they're doing everything to point us in the direction of belief. Belief in the resurrection. And we're going to take a look at that next time. Until then, peace out.